we would just like to introduce Laverne Seib. She is one of our SHAC, the Sheep Advisory Committee members, and she is also a vet. So she is a producer as well, and she's just going to talk to us about all the different kinds, or some of the kinds of parasites and bugs that our sheep can get and what you can do to help prevent it and to treat them. So thank you, Laverne, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Erin, and thank you to Shaq, thank you to Tracy, and for helping to organize this, and I guess we can get going. All right, let me get my screen shared. All righty. Okay, so tonight we are going to talk a little bit about what kind of bugs we can affect our forage lamb projects. So I'm not going to talk about diseases that we can see in our flock or diseases that we can see in our older breeding lamb projects, forage projects. We're just going to concentrate a little bit on the ewe lambs and the market lambs. Okay, so let's just start off with a bug. So Arlene was like, let's talk about bugs. So what actually is a bug? So when we talk about bugs, bugs could be anything from bugs in the rumen, the digestive tract, a very important part of our sheep and the digestive system, which you guys are going to learn about nutrition in part 3 of the series. So please stay tuned for that in a few weeks. But they can also be like the ladybug. A ladybug that hops and rides on the back of a sheep is a bug. But what bugs are we talking about? We are talking about microorganisms or organisms that infect our sheep and then can create a disease. So what are those bugs? Well, for purposes of tonight, I'm classifying them as viruses, bacteria, and parasites. So again, then we'll classify them a little more. So we'll decide, okay, when we have that group of bacteria and organisms, how do they infect the animal? Do they infect the outside of the animal, or do they infect the inside of the animal? So if they're a bug that into the animal and affects tissue inside the animal, we're going to call it an internal bacteria, virus, parasite. If it attacks the outside of the animal, we're going to call external parasite, a virus, or a bacteria. So for most parts, you'll hear that term as an external parasite or an internal parasite, just meaning here's my fluffy sheep, affects the inside, here's my fluffy sheep, I see the disease on the outside. All right, so tonight, quick outline of what we'll be doing. So as we were going to talk about from nose to tail, what bugs can we expect to see or may see? We have, again, external parasites, internal parasites, bacterial infections, both inside and outside, viral infections, and I want to touch a little bit about biosecurity, how we should consider in a 4-H situation. Biosecurity is always a good thing to know. Alrighty, here is our lamb, our 4-H project. We start some of the diseases that we can see, and I see some of the pictures didn't come through. We can get sore mouth or contagious exanthema, or we get lesions on the skin of the outside of the animal. Keratoconjunctivitis or pink eye, we can infection of the eye, we can get ringworm lesions, we can have lice, we can have KED infections, we can have odor eating disease, we can have foot rot, we can have tapeworm infections, and make coccidiosis. So this is a collection of diseases caused by organisms that can infect our market lambs. Okay, so I would not be doing my job if I was a veterinarian and didn't mention this. So a zoonosis, or zoonotic disease is a disease, by definition, that people can catch from the animal. So when we work with our animals, it's probably a good idea to wear gloves because some of our infections we can catch from the animal. It's always it's good to play it on the side of caution and assume that all can be zoonotic, but there's a good to know which ones that we're dealing with that could cause an issue. Okay, so our first category is going to be the external parasites. So that will include, so external parasites are on the outside of the animal. A parasite is an organism that can live only by living on another animal. So it is benefiting by living on the sheep. So we call that a parasite. So a kid, it's going to live on top of the sheep in the wool, same lives in the skin, or ringworm is infection on the skin. So let's talk about those guys each. Alrighty, little sheep cads. I don't know how many of you guys have gotten to see a sheep cad. A sheep cad is a wingless fly. A lot of people call them sheep ticks, but they're actually not a tick. A tick has 8 legs. If you count these guys, they've got 1, 2, 3, so they've got 6 legs. So in this picture, here's an adult cad. Sorry, I'm on my laptop. It's a little bit on the sensitive side. Very sensitive, otherwise. Stop a second, because okay. Beauties of the internet. All right, we'll get back here. Okay, back to the same. All right, start from the beginning, please. All right, thank you. Okay. Keep my hand away from there. All righty, back to our sheep cad. So the middle guy, he's an adult cad. The left side's a young, a juvenile cad. And then the right-hand side is a pupa. So kids produce eggs, but they do not lay an egg. They actually lay a larva. So the egg hatches within their, they lay the larva, and the larvae glues on a piece of the fleece. So some of the wool, the fleece, and then it produces a pupa around the larvae. So on the right-hand side, you will see a pupa. So when we look inside the wool, we will see little kids moving around, blood sucking. So they may have inserted their mouth part. If you take the adult, he has big pointy mouth parts at the front, and he has claws in his leg into the animal and is sucking blood, having blood. Melophagus is the fancy name, scientific name. These guys are quite large, so they're about 6 to 7 millimeters in length, which if you take a pencil, it's about the width of a pencil. See, you part the wool. And treatment for these guys, the approved or the licensed product would be a pyrethrin. So we have porum products such as Boss, which is licensed, that we can apply to the back of an animal. Usually, or the ideal time would be after shearing the animal, so that we remove, the process of shearing is going to remove a lot of the adult cads, but then we can apply, it'll be easier also to get skin contact with our insecticide that we'd be using. All right, so the next parasite is going to be lice. The most common louse in sheep in this area is the biting or the chewing louse, and it's the Demolinea ovis, and ovis is short for sheep. But if you look at the pictures on the right, the top part is a biting or a chewing louse, and if you look at his mouth parts, he has a very broad snout, we'll say, so that he can feed on debris, dead pieces of skin secretions, little loose blood that's on the skin. The next louse is actually a sucking louse. So he has a long, skinny nose. He will actually embed into the skin, between the skin cells, and he will feed on blood. And so as the picture shows, he's a little darker color because his belly is also full of blood. They cause irritation in the sheep because of the biting. So it makes them feel itchy, and they're aggravated by that. They're actually quite small compared to our kid. So our kid was the size of a pencil, so 7 millimeters. These guys are about 2 millimeters in length. So if you take the tip of a Crayola crayon, that's about 2 millimeters in size, and that's what they are. I like to try and part, like the biting lice, or the chewing louse, he's going to be where the wool is. There's different kinds of lice that are sucking lice, the sucking lice, that will go on the face and will go onto the legs, but most of the ones we are going to see are going to be in areas with wool. So if you part the wool and you take a look down, you should be able to see these little brown guys. If you think you see it, take it on your hand and see it moving. If it starts to move, some people put it in a Ziploc bag. That helps you tell. So with the kid, they did not lay eggs. They would actually lay a little larvae right away that would pupate. With the lice, they actually do lay eggs. And they, again, glue those eggs onto the wool. So if you take the microscope, a lot of times you can see the hair or the fiber, the wool fiber, and it will have a little knit, which we call the eggs, right on the thing. So these eggs hatch in 2 weeks. So that's an important number to remember, because when it comes to treating lice, we can use a very similar product that we used to kill the sheep kids. So we can use this Boss, this Pour-On permethrin. So it's a very small volume, will get poured right onto the back of the sheep to help kill the adult lice. Now, unfortunately, and depending on what time of year it is, depends on how much you're infested, you may have to repeat that treatment. So that's where the 2 weeks is important, because those eggs will hatch in 2 weeks. You'll have a new crop of lice. You'll want to repeat your treatment 2 weeks to get those as well. If you're getting closer in spring, shearing process again will take off a lot of the lice as well. You may not have to repeat it. All right, so then our last one of the external parasites is ringworm. So this, as I have noted up here, is a zoonotic disease. So if we can catch ringworm from our sheep, we can catch ringworm from our cows, we can catch ringworm from our dogs, we can catch it from our cats. I think majority of my family has had ringworm already. I've had it a few times. So it is infectious to humans. So if you do suspect it, you do want to try to avoid it. So this parasite is a fungus. So trichophyton species, it's just there's a bunch of different types of this fungus that can cause ringworm, but in sheep, it's usually a trichophyton. And it's very frequently a show sheep disease. Sheep that have been washed frequently with soap and water, their lanolin barrier, they're a little more prone. Also, it's a contagious disease, meaning it can be transferred easily between each other, animals in close contact, and they could be sharing brushes, they could be sharing halters. There's just a greater chance of spreading it from each other. One thing about the disease, once you get it on your farm, you usually have it on your farm because it does contaminate your fences and your pens. And what do you see just from the picture? You frequently will see circular type lesions. They don't have to be, but frequently are, giving the name ringworm, where you have hair loss and they're kind of scabby. And the active disease is actually on the outside of the wound. I think the most common spots for it are the head, the necks, and the ears is where you most see it. But depending on the animal, depending on its immune state, it can be spread throughout the animal. Treatment, we usually let it run its course. There is, for approved products or licensed products for sheep, there is not anything. There is a few antiseptics, there's a few products that can speed it up, but in most situations, it's a disease, we just let it run its course. It is not really life-threatening for the animal, but it is an active lesion, so you would not be able to take your animal. You should not take your animal to Achievement Day, to other shows or gatherings, weigh-ins. If you do see something like that, you do realize it's contagious and it will limit your movement. Okay, so from external parasites, we're going to go to internal parasites. So internal parasites, with everything we've talked about prior to this, the diseases were obvious. We could see them. We could pull the hair apart. We could see the kids. We could see the lice. We can see big spots of ringworm. With an internal parasite, you don't see obvious disease on the inside, and that's where the parasite is affecting the animal. But you may see some of the effects of the disease on the outside. So we're going to chat about coccidiosis, tapeworm infection, and very briefly, gastrointestinal worms, or the regular parasite worms, because most of our younger forage animals are not going to be on pasture, but so I know some clubs do have lambs and achievement days later, so the lambs will get pasture exposure. All right, so let's start off with coccidiosis. So coccidiosis, again, an internal parasite. It's a protozoa. So we've had, of our parasites so far, this is a protozoa. We've had a fungi. We've had arthropods. My goodness. And I'm trying to think of the other externals. So you can see in the parasite category, we have a lot of different organisms. So this coccidia is like an Emeria species. So again, every animal has a different kind of cocci that'll affect it, but it is microscopic. So with our kids, with our lice, they're very big. The ringworm organism, the organism itself, the fungi, is going to be microscopic. And then the cocci, it's microscopic. So what types of diseases it cause? So the animals will eat the cocci organisms. So cocci is a word we call ubiquitous, which means it's everywhere. In some areas we have heavier loads than others. So, and animals can have cocci in them and it can be normal. It's just a matter of how their immune system is and also how much of an infection they have. So if they have too much, they're going to get sick. Where do they pick it up? They're going to pick it up from their pen. They're going to pick it up from their feeders, their waters. So areas, and if it's a high stocking density, it's a greater chance. Cocci is everywhere. Just to be said, we see it all the time. What does the main thing it do? It causes a decreased rate of gain of growth. So if we do know we're getting an animal from someone to have cocci, we don't have our own sheep farm with medicated feed, or we're getting animals, or we're a small farm and we've been going for a few years and had no issues, but all of a sudden now we're getting more animals, we may start getting issues. So something to watch for if your animal starts to get looser feces or some staining on the back. So, and it can get severe enough that it can cause death. But what I call this is an iceberg disease. So tip of the iceberg disease, and I'll explain that in a second. So when I said, if you're a big farm and you're adding something to your feed, as I say, prevention is key. So how can we prevent cocci? we can prevent it with coccidiosis. So they are products, medications that get added into the feed and help prevent the cocci from growing. So there's about three different kinds, but they can get added right away as a starter, and then when they get growing. As an acreage owner, if you only have a handful of projects, but you want to treat them, there's a product called Bacox. So Bacox is approved for sheep as well, so it's licensed. So it can be given when the animal has disease, so it can help treat it to get better, but it can also be used as a preventative as well. So if you know the animals usually get cocci about 4 weeks of age, 4 to 6 weeks of age, we want to go in about 2 to 3 weeks old and give them Bacox to prevent it. Alrighty, a very important disease. Okay, so iceberg disease. So coccidiosis is an iceberg disease. So when you go in the ocean and you look at an iceberg, you see a very little tip of it on the ground. So when you look at a group of sheep, you may see a handful that have dirty bumps. Unfortunately, if you go under the water, there's a huge amount of iceberg there. So the same thing with your sheep. A lot of other sheep are infected as well. You're just not seeing disease yet. But those sheep are going to have decreased rates of gain and may have some ill thrift depending on the degree. So prevention, coccidiosis and prevention. Alrighty, so another disease now, let's change modes a little bit. Again, another parasite. Coccidiosis was a parasite, and tapeworm is an internal parasite. So this is going to be very weather dependent. A lot of 4-H kids may not see it, but some, especially if you have later projects, you may see it. So tapeworm infection is caused by an organism called Monesia. Tapeworms are very interesting looking things. They are ribbon-like, they're very long, they have a head that has suckers on it so that it can attach to the insides of the intestines, and then the rest of its body is flat and made out of segments. And it kind of flows along the intestine all the way down. So all these segments can be then separated. So when we see a lamb or sheep infected with tapeworms, the little segments get released and passed into the feces. And so that's what this picture is showing. It's showing you sheep poop and then little segments of tapeworm. Each of those segments of tapeworm has thousands of eggs. So this is how this tapeworm is shedding its eggs. Okay, so the tapeworm can't just do its life cycle on its own. The tapeworm needs a little bit of help. Then there's different kinds of tapeworm. This is a different tapeworm than the tapeworm that we get worried about with our guard dogs. So this is the true sheep tapeworm. This is a different tapeworm. So this tapeworm, it still needs another buddy to help it along with its life cycle. And it's funny because different worms have different buddies to help them. So this tapeworm actually uses soil mites. So you can get tapeworm infection without going out to pasture. Unlike a lot of worm infections, you need to have pasture to transmit eggs. For these guys, you have a little mite, and that mite is a soil mite. So you can actually, in a pen, in a corral, you can get tapeworm infections. So what happens is the little mite comes along because the sheep has pooped out some little segments with eggs, and the mite wants to eat the segments. And while it eats the segments, it ends up eating a whole bunch of eggs. And then it eats a bunch of eggs, it becomes infected. So then it flies around a little bit, it gets into the sheep's hay, and then the sheep eats it. The sheep all of a sudden has tapeworm infections. The eggs molt, the eggs hatch, and they form into adult tapeworms, and we've completed the cycle. So as ugly as tapeworm is, though, it is not a significant parasite. And if you want to, you can actually ignore it, and most of the times it's not a big deal. The problem being occasionally you can get such an infection with tapeworms that you can get blockages in the intestines. or you can get unthrifty sheep. They actually start to get sick. And treatment for tapeworm infection is with products like albazin and fenbendazole, so valbazin and Safeguard, but majority of our wormers will not treat this infection. So it's an interesting disease. I guess one of the other good reasons to treat it is you don't want to sell wormy looking sheep. So it's something visual that people can see. You may say, you know what, we want to try and clean them up before we sell them. Alrighty, so then we'll quickly talk about gastrointestinal worms. As I said, I said most here, but a lot of 4-H projects, the initial lamb projects, are completed earlier in the year, much before the animals are going to pasture and we're going to see gastrointestinal worms. That being said, we do have projects that end later in the summer, and we also have the adult projects. But gastrointestinal worms are it's unique for every farm. So it is something that has to be taken serious because we are getting a lot of resistant issues in the treatment. So you need to develop a parasite control program. And from that program should be developed with some information on hand. So it's hard to just say, in the old days, we used to just say, let's worm all the sheep, send them out to pasture. Nowadays, we want to say, let's do some refugia, let's only do selective treatment, and that will be how we don't get all resistant parasites. So what kind of detective work can we do? We can do fecal egg counts where we take samples of poop. We do special, in the lab, we do some special floating and special solutions. We can then look at it and we see worm eggs. We can do something called Vermontia scoring, and then that is like some of the bugs will suck blood. We can tell for anemia. We can do fecal egg counts, reduction tests where we're looking for resistance. And then we can also do postmortem results. So this is not a bad time to get your veterinarian involved. And the veterinarians also can help you with some of the other diseases and making decisions on going to show and some of the zoonotic diseases. So what we need to do is develop a veterinary client-patient relationship. And once we do that, then we're allowed to sell you different medications that your sheep may need, but we can also help make a very educated parasite control program. So that's all I'm going to say on worms because it's really complicated. And luckily, in most situations for each projects, we don't need to worry about it. Okay, let's move on to the next ones, the bacterial infections. So keratoconjunctivitis is just plain old pink eye. Again, zoonotic, it has a potential of being zoonotic. They have had some reports that some of the mycoplasmas have infected people. So I guess when you're dealing with the eyes, we have foot rot that's caused by bacteria, and we have that disease that's called overeating disease or enterotoxemia, which is also caused by a bacteria. All right, so let's start with pink eye. So pink eye, the two main organisms we have are Mycoplasma species and Chlamydia species. Usually the disease is brought in with an animal, or if we take an animal to a fair and we get exposed to carrier animals, that is definitely one way to catch it as well. It affects either one eye or both eyes, and it can make the animal totally blind. We usually see red and inflamed tissue around the eye, and that tissue is called the conjunctiva, so that's where conjunctivitis comes in. But then also we can see a cloudy cornea. So the cornea is, if you look at the eyeball, the nice round part of the eyeball, the outside round clear part, that is our cornea. So when we get keratoconjunctivitis or we get pink eye, it's actually the cornea as well is getting inflamed. So all these white blood cells are moving in and making it cloudy. And in really bad cases, we can get what's called a corny ulcer. So that's like someone came and just took a big divot and you have a pothole in your cornea. Because normally your cornea is smooth as glass and it's perfect. But if that disease is really severe and aggressive, it can create a corny ulcer where it's a divot and it's harder and takes longer to heal. So now the very important thing about pink eye in sheep, in my opinion, is that it is extremely painful disease. If you've ever had anything happen to your eye, it's very painful. So these poor girls are in a lot of pain. So when we talk about treatment of pink eye in sheep, in cattle, it's a little bit different. In sheep, we're dealing with a bit different organisms. So we can give them some antibiotics, but it may help with other bacteria that are coming in, but it may not help. But it's a good idea, you can do it. But I think most importantly is you want to give them something like Metacam, which is a very strong painkiller, and it is licensed for sheep as well. The other things we can help to relieve the pain in pink eye is we can put a little patch on the eye to help prevent sunlight, because if you have a really sore eye, having bright sun hurts it like heck. So if you can put a patch on it, it can help. And you can also sometimes put ointments, eye ointments, directly on the eye. It is usually self-limiting, so despite us treating it, it will get better unless that eye is damaged and the cornea has a big hole in it. Really bad looking eyes can get better. Okay, foot rot. Okay, another infectious disease. And the bacteria, the two main culprits of bacteria are Fusobacterium necrophorum and Dactylobacter nodosus. So we kind of have two types. We have what's called foot scald, and it's the space between the two toes. So that top picture, the space between the two toes is infected. The hoof itself is fine, but the space is infected. So if you're used to cows, that is what foot rot is in cattle. It's actually the interdigital, so between the toes, that space is infected. In sheep, we just call that foot scald. All right, and then usually that's just Fusobacterium. If you get Mr. Dactylobacter coming in, he can be really severe or he can be really mild. So depending on what strain you get coming in to affect your sheep, it takes that foot scald and then it goes another step further. So it has some proteins that actually melt away tissues. So it gets infected, it can melt away all the cartilage and all the keratin in that hoof wall. And you can see how the hoof wall in that bottom picture is totally separated and the sole is falling off. Another very extremely painful disease, very infectious as well. And it is brought in by carrier sheep. So you usually, as we say, you buy the disease by bringing it in. And again, severity will depend on the strains. And treatment, depending on severity, but is a combination usually of trimming the feet, keeping feet not getting too long, different types of foot baths, and then sometimes culling. So culling means selling the sheep, taking her off your farm and selling her. Not usually to other people, usually to market, because you don't want to pass on the infection to other people. And there is some antibiotics that are in sheep and anti-inflammatories, which mostly I do for the pain. And again, Metacam would be a good choice as well too. And again, it is licensed for use in sheep. Okay, so let's talk about overeating disease or enterotoxemia, another bacterial disease. So it is caused by a bacteria called Clostridia perfringens type D. It is actually a normal inhabitant of the intestine. So every sheep running around has Clostridia in its belly. The problem happens when that Clostridia has an overgrowth, and then it grows like mad and goes a little bit crazy. So something has upset it and it's grown. So sometimes that can be they got too much grain, they had too quick a change in diet, their mom is a really heavy milker, they're a singleton, and they're getting all the food themselves. So those are all things that can happen. I always think of it as a sudden death disease because usually for me, when I see it or I'm cutting open a dead lamb trying to find out why it died. And usually what the farmer will say, it's one of the biggest and it's one of the best. So why did we get the disease? The bacteria produces toxins, and those toxins get absorbed into the system. So often they die so quickly, when I open up a dead baby lamb, I will not see anything happened because the toxins didn't even have time to destroy the tissues enough for me to see. The disease was so severe and so quick. Why do we not see a lot of it? Because we vaccinate. So prevention is definitely the best for overeating disease or enterotoxemia. So anything vaccination, so Clostridia perfringens, type C and D, and tetanus is usually the mainstay, but we have more combos in Canada. So some of the products you guys may be familiar with is Glanvax 6, Tasvax, Ultrabac, Vision 8, Covaxin Plus. Covaxin Plus is not approved for use, licensed for use in sheep, but it is commonly used because it is a small amount and quite a smooth vaccine. It doesn't cause a lot of tissue reaction. But yes, and so usually the recommendations are, and when you have your projects, if you have a few sheep on your farm and they're getting bred, you can do this yourself, but vaccinate them before they lamb because sheep pass protection through their colostrum. So if you vaccinate mommy before she has her baby, when she has colostrum in her milk, she'll pass those protection against this disease in the colostrum to the baby. So that will be good until that baby's about 6 to 10 weeks of age. Then baby needs his own vaccine. So that's when you'll come in with your Glanvac or you'll come in with your Covaxin and you will give baby a vaccine and you have to booster it a month later. So clostridial vaccines, very important with sheep because we don't like enterotoxemia. Alrighty, viral diseases, there's lots of them, but in our situation, I think the only real significant one I kind of wanted to pull up was sore mouth or ORF. Again, another zoonotic disease, so wear gloves when you're handling. Sore mouth is a contagious xanthoma. It is a virus, so it's a pox virus. It's microscopic as well. It usually starts with little pimples. And it likes the junction between the skin and the hair. So as you look around here, around the smile of the mouth, we kind of have the mucus junction on the inside of the mouth, all that nice smooth tissues, the mucous membrane, and then we have the tough skin on the outside. So the virus likes to hit those kinds of areas. So often that's where you'll see it start, or if there's other breaks in the skin, it will too. But it usually starts with little pimples, and then they turn into what we call little pustules, and then those little pustules will burst and you get open sores, and eventually they will crust over and form scabs. The scabs have lots of virus in it, so when they fall off, they contaminate the environment, and they contaminate the pen if it's a wooden pen, and then contaminate the walls if there's wooden fences. But like I said, usually you'll have lesions around the mouth, but you can see it around the eyes, you can see it around the ears. The teats are very common, and you can actually see it on the vulva and some other of the genitalia as well. It usually resolves in 4 to 6 weeks, and there's no real treatment. This is a disease. We will talk about isolation. Isolation is one way of treating it. Isolate, keep their immune system up, support secondary disease, because sometimes the lambs, their mouths hurt so badly they can't suck. If you have a 4-H lamb though, they're big enough, they should be okay. If they get sore mouth, it should hopefully run its course in 4 to 6 weeks. Alrighty. So we talked about a handful of the diseases that we wanted to talk about. Now I just want to mention the topic of biosecurity. So biosecurity is the practice of preventing or reducing the spread of infectious disease. So let's look into that a little bit deeper. So bio and security, let's break the word up a little bit. So bio is a living organism, and security is to keep safe. All right, so biosecurity. So our living organism in this case, so organisms can be microscopic to really big. So our organism is going to be our sheep. It's going to be our 4-H project. So we want to keep our 4-H sheep safe. So there's 3 main things to, in my opinion, to make a biosecurity. So the first one is stop. Let's prevent disease from coming onto our farm. All right, that's number 1. Number 2, disease spreading within the flock. So if I have overeating disease, what can I do? I can vaccinate. If I have foot rot, infectious foot rot, what can I do? I can do foot baths, I can do trimming, I can separate, I can isolate. Those are how I'm going to prevent some spreading. If I have infectious pink eye, I can isolate the infected sheep to try and prevent the spreading. Okay, so if I prevent diseases from going off the farm, that's number 3. So I don't want them to go onto my farm, I don't want them spreading on my farm, and I do not want them to go to other people's farms. So biosecurity, that's the principles. All right, so diseases coming onto the farm. We want to purchase, I know when you're trying to build a flock up, you want to buy a lot of different type of animals, or if you're in 4-H, you may get one here, you may have another opportunity here, or that person doesn't have any this year, or you want to try a different breed. So you can end up buying from a lot of different places. They're all good places, but the problem is that every farm has their own bugs. There's very few farms that don't have their own bacteria or infection or virus. Almost everybody has. I look at it as you have your own bugs. So if you can limit where you buy your stuff, you hopefully are bringing less bugs, different bugs to your farm and infections and diseases. When you go to buy an animal, you have to ask lots of questions. You want to know, has it been treated? If so, when was it treated? With what was it treated? Why was it treated? And is it vaccinated, right? You want to isolate the animal, so keep it away from the rest of your animals, just in case it is still harboring a little bit of disease from some things will run their course. It's self-limiting, it'll be gone, so you won't spread it to your others. Others, you may know because that producer told you, oh, you know, I have a problem with these abortions. So that gives you time to vaccinate these animals before you introduce them with the rest of yours. Or if you were concerned because it showed up a little bit lame while it was there and it looked a little bit like foot rot, you could treat it before you put it back in. So isolation, a quarantine period is wanting to keep things off your farm. Quarantine when you're buying, but also quarantine when you're bringing animals back to your farm from fairs and shows and sales and such. It's best if you can. So, and just remembering again, prevention is the best treatment of most animal diseases, and prevention, isolation is quarantining is part of prevention. All right, diseases spreading within my flock. Okay, so what I said before, let's keep our vaccinations up to date. We don't want the spreading of the overeating. If we have one problem, coccidiosis, put a decoquinate, put some kind of coccidiosis, so the medicine in the feed that helps prevent it. Monitor and treat parasites as needed, right? So we could have a huge parasite problem and we can have carriers, but we do not want to spread it all over our pasture and then give it to more sheep. Infectious, we didn't talk about it, but some of the different abortion diseases, again, we want to prevent young stock maybe from being exposed. If an animal's sick, if it has foot rot. Another disease we didn't talk about is CL. Again, we want to isolate some of these so we don't contaminate our environment and we don't make other animals sick. So one with pink eye, another reason to isolate. And wear hand gloves when handling sick animals, because we can be what's called a fomite, meaning that we can take disease from one spot, one sick animal, and take it to a normal animal and make it sick. And also that thing called zoonotic diseases, we could catch some of these things from sheep as well. Okay, diseases going off farm. What do I always tell my 4-H group? Because I am a 4-H project leader. I always say, wear clean clothing off your farm or your acreage. Not only clean boots, because sometimes we'll use disposable boots, but I want you to have clean clothing, maybe not your farm clothes. If you want to wear your farm clothes, you have to have them freshly laundered, right? Just out of respect of the farm that you are going to, you want to make sure that you are dressed appropriately. If an animal has active disease, do not sell that animal. So active disease is it has a ringworm lesion, it just got it. It has ORF, where it's still really sore and angry looking. Those are what's active. You can get ringworm. It takes ringworm a long, long time for that circle to leave, and sometimes it doesn't always grow hair back totally back. But you can tell when it's an old lesion and it's not active. When it's active, we call it angry looking. It's still kind of scabby and sore looking. Then when it's angry looking, it's still infectious. And you don't want to take it to anyone, and you don't want to sell it to anyone. Again, when we're talking 4-H activities, do not take your animals if you see any active disease, right? That would be contagious. So if you do see they have some infectious pink eye, best not to take them. If they have some ringworm, if they have any lesions of ORF, it's just best not to if you don't. If you have questions, you can get a health check done. I did practice in the States for a while, and they have tons, well, this is well before COVID times, but they have tons and tons of state fairs. It's a lot of fun, but lots and lots of little state fairs. And they would have to do health checks before they went to any of their state fairs. So it's not a bad idea to be proactive yourself. And if you are concerned about something about your sheep, just talk to your local veterinarian about it before you go. All right, so just a summary of what we talked about tonight, just kind of a quick overview of some of the diseases. So there are a lot of bugs that can affect our 4-H lamb projects. These bugs can be parasites, bacteria, and viruses, and the parasites can be fungi, protozoa, arthropods.
I should have just left it.
Maybe we lost Laverne. Laverne, I can still see your name. I think we've just lost her for a brief minute. Yep, there you are. She'll jump back on. Oh, there she is. Just have to unmute Laverne.
Was I gone long?
No, not too bad.
I'm pretty good it lasted this long, because my internet's been horrible. So we're almost done. We're on the last slides. We're doing good.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you guys catch any of that?
I think right at the just start here on your summary, I think was
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we talked about, I'll go quickly through this in case we did some of it. All right. So we talked that there's a lot of bugs that can affect our projects. These bugs can be parasites, bacteria, and viruses, which we talked about. They can infect sheep on the inside and they can infect sheep on the outside. Some of the diseases are zoonotic, so that means we can catch it. We want to be careful and we want to wear gloves. If they have ringworm or they have ORF or if they have pink eye. And we want to follow strong or strict biosecurity practices to help prevent diseases coming into our flock. And if we practice biosecurity, we can help prevent spread of disease in our flock and to other flocks. All righty. And we are done. So I guess any questions? I know it's a lot of big words and it's a lot of, once you see a disease though, you will understand and you will remember you saw it, and you don't need to know about treating and all that. That's why we kind of whizzed over that, because that's stuff that we worry about and it changes all the time. I think it's important though to remember that we do have products that are licensed for sheep, so that's the first things we should be grabbing out of our toolkit of medicines, and we do have to think about the welfare of the animals and the pain control. So I think those are my main take homes. So.
I have a question.
Yep.
With coccidiosis, I've seen it in cattle. They get a black feces. Is it the same in sheep? And are there any precursors that can help you before you get to the black manure?
Okay, it cut off for a second, but you're asking because you get black manure in the coccidiosis in steers, right? That's what you're asking, okay. So you can get blood, so the black is actually blood, because digested blood is black, so it's blood. And it's just the severity sometimes of the type. So yes, lambs can get bloody diarrhea or black diarrhea. The disease process is about the same. So again, prevention, so treating with coccidiostats, or if you're smaller scale and you don't have enough medicated feed that you can treat it, you can do the Bacox preventatively. So, and depending on, in most farms, and I can look at both sheep farms and cattle farm because I do a fair bit of both, people will sometimes do preventative right at birth. It's lower on my list, but that's when you can handle them. The next, like we had said, if you can do preventative, like tolazarol, so Bacox, just about prior to the event of cocci. So like we said, we know most of the times that they are going to get the disease about that 4 to 6 weeks, or maybe 3 to 6, depends on how infectious it is. You can give it prior to then. But I would say Bacox if you cannot do in the feed treatment. Otherwise, if you have a history of coccidiosis, you're way better off to do treatment in your feed of a coccidiostat.
Thank you.
That's good. Thank you.
In the chat, Laverne, there's a question. What would the withdrawal be on medicated feed for this disease?
For decox, a lot of times it's 0 days for a decock or lasalicid. For Bovatec in the feed, most it's usually, if you add on some of the other medications, it may be up to like 5 to 10 days max, but it's usually not that long at all. So most of them, it's even a 0 withdrawal.
I just wondered with continuing our learning about biosecurity and all the bugs and diseases we have to be on the lookout for, should we get ourselves a nice little book and use our iPhones to take pictures of things so we kind of remember, yeah, this is what ORF looks like with a sore mouth, and you know, on this day we vaccinated all 10, you know, maybe each of you has her own page, Becky and Tracy and Sam. Would that be a good idea for kids to maybe start adopting? And if you see something weird, take a picture of it.
It is, you know, it is very, it's a lot more commonplace, a lot of this you think, like just running the club, it's not uncommon for the kids to have the ORF because they're stressed lambs that have been weaned and brought from another location, and even the farm has a history but hasn't had ORF for ages. I frequently have kids that have ORF lambs that they're pulling them back and not bringing them to weigh-ins and not bringing them to things. So, and I've seen majority. That's why I picked these diseases, because these are ones I've probably seen every last one of them at one of the groups. So.
Another question in the chat, Laverne, what are the signs of tapeworm and different worms in sheep?
Alrighty. So tapeworms, you are just going to see the white segments in the manure. So when you walk out to see a feces pile, you'll see all those little white, people say they look like rice. I think they're bigger than rice, but you'll see the segments. Sometimes they will pass the adult tapeworm because she has that head with the suckers on it, and she's grabbed onto the intestine, holding on, and her tail swinging in the breeze. So sometimes it may die or just falls out. So that tapeworm's like about 1 meter long. So you can be panicky because you think there's intestines hanging out of your sheep, but it's a 1 meter long tapeworm. You can get ill thrift, but usually at that point in time, you're going to see the white segments. Other worms in sheep, you will see diarrhea, so you will see a dirty bum, the dirty back ends. You will see skinny sheep because some of the parasites are higher up in the intestine, so you do not see the diarrhea. You can see what's called anemia, where you have blood loss and they're actually pale. So that's what the Fomantia, it's all very quick, went through things, but the Fomantia scoring is actually looking for the degree of how much the bugs have actually sucked out of the sheep. So those are probably the main. Weight loss, number one weight loss for me. Oh, bottle jaw is another symptom. If you see it, it's a lot of times sear. And bottle jaw is fluid accumulation at the base of the jaw, so you get a little bit of a swelling, a waddle. The sheep has a waddle under her neck. Loose skin, fill it up with fluid. So weight loss, diarrhea, anemia, bottle jaw would be the main things. And is Tasvac better or stronger than Glanvac? I see that one. Okay, so depending on your situation, for me, it's not necessarily a stronger, it's just a different vaccine. So Glanvac helps also to control the disease called caseous lymphadenitis. So for me, if a farm has a history or has a problem with caseous lymphadenitis or the pus lumps, then we will talk about a control program using Glanvac. It's not going to prevent them all, but it should decrease how many you see on the farm. So if you have a history of that, then I'll say let's go Glanvac. Unless you're one that wants to do some treating, it'll interfere with treating, but it's a very expensive disease to test for. It's a very expensive disease to test for, so not a lot of people do, but that's something we discuss about. So usually I will go with a Tasvac, Covexin, or a Vision type product instead that doesn't have the caseous lymphadenitis.
I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. Neva, are you trying to ask a question? I see you on our screen now. She might just be having trouble unmuting. There was one comment in the comment box about there is an app called Herd Boss for sheep, I guess, probably for tracking treatments and stuff like that. And I think Laverne's screen.
Cattle, just sheep.
Oh, there you go. Okay, Laverne, the
Yeah.
next question. Yeah, the disease transfer from sheep to cattle or cattle. You froze for a second, so.
My internet is like, it is dicey tonight. I'm glad we made it this far. Alrighty, so sheep to cattle, cattle to sheep. Luckily, parasites are very minimal. The coccidiosis is species specific. The lice are species specific. So even if it jumps on us, it's going to take off. We don't have to worry about getting head lice from our sheep. Ringworm could be. And then, well, I guess MCF being the big one, malignant catarrhal fever. Sheep, majority of sheep are going to be carriers of that disease, where cattle are susceptible to it. That would probably be the big one. Eweni's disease. Eweni's disease is another one. It's a wasting disease. It gets spread in the manure. So if they are on a pasture together, the nice thing about sheep, I'm more worried about. Okay, okay. If you are feeding lambs cow colostrum, don't do it, in my opinion, unless it's a beef cow. But if dairy colostrum, you have such a high risk of transmitting Eweni's disease. So I highly recommend for my clients not to get dairy colostrum and give it to their lambs. It is a huge chance of getting Eweni's disease into your flock. So that's a really high risk. So that would be one transmission. If you're running cattle after sheep on a pasture, I think usually sheep follow cattle. So the sheep are at risk because of cow patties. Cows are at less risk because sheep pellets are so small. And they're pellets. So it's easier for them not to get it. So MCF, Eweni's disease, ringworm, some of the bacterial diseases, but it's going to be similar situations. They're not really infectious between the two. That's probably the majority of them. Eweni's disease being a big one, and MCF, I would say, would be the top two.
Okay, so maybe you see the next question. What are the best ways to keep wormload down? Rotational grazing, monthly pen cleaning.
Okay, I don't think I froze again. All righty. Oh, yes, and it is very dependent on your farm. Rotational grazing is difficult to get the right rotation for me. The moment I do anything is I recommend just doing an integrated flock parasite program, and we do fecal exams, fecal egg counts. We grab fecal egg counts. We get a scenario. We get a picture of what's on your flock. We kind of usually do what you're going to do. We do selective deworming, and then we redo and look for reductions. Because of resistance being such an issue in the sheep world, it's in every world. We're seeing cattle as well too, but it's worse in the sheep world. That parasite control has to be a combination of everything. I don't think there's one best action. I think the best thing is knowing what you've got. The way I tell my producers is, let's spend money on fecal egg counts and save money on wormer, because if I can do fecal egg counts, I can probably cut your worming costs in half. We will do a lot less worming, we'll do it a lot smarter worming, but we'll also know what we have and how it's working. Because what's the point of worming your entire flock of 200 sheep if the wormer does not work? You're just wasting your money. If we do fecal egg counts, you worm, we look for reduction, we know it worked, we don't have to redo it. If it didn't work, we know you have a problem, we redo it. So I think knowing a lot of information is worthwhile. So, and then your other ideas about cleaning pans and some rotational grazing, those will be add-ons to some of the other stuff.
Okay, if nobody has any more questions, I think Erin will wrap this up. Erin, or do you want me to?
Thank you, Laverne. That was awesome. We really appreciate all the work you put into it. Everybody give Laverne a big virtual round of applause. And thanks all the members for coming on the call tonight and participating in our workshop. It's really great to see all of you here and engaged, and we look forward to seeing you again, next week we will have a talk about feedlots and what happens beyond the feedlot gates. So thanks again, Laverne. We really appreciate everything that you did for the group tonight. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you all next week, April 22nd, for our feedlot presentation. Okay, good night, everyone.
Super. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks.